Welcome everybody. Hi, my name is Nick Zarowski. I am actually have a new title now, as of January, Manager for Policy and Advocacy at the Alliance for Peacebuilding. I am the main AFP point of contact for the Digital Peacebuilding Community of Practice. We are a community of practice centered around implementing the ideals of peacebuilding on the technological and digital front. And we're open to the public. We're open to both interested members of the public who are looking to apply tools and the main ideas of digital peace building in their everyday lives, but also experienced practitioners, policymakers, donors, etc. So it's a very healthy mix of individuals here. I do encourage everybody to please introduce themselves in the chat so we get a good kind of idea for who's here, the profiles you bring, the backgrounds, your expertise. I think we always have kind of a dynamic discussion every single no two sessions have the same makeup. I do also want to quickly introduce Nicholas Gugerty. I'm going to pin him, if that's okay. Nicholas Gugerty, he is our new Senior Associate for Communications at the Alliance for Peacebuilding. He just joined last week, right? Yep. This is your second week. And he will be involved with community practice as well, which is very exciting. So we're very excited to have him here. And welcome. Okay, awesome. So with that, all right, Nicholas, I'm removing your pen. Goodbye. We are very excited today to welcome Jennifer Easterday and Ayesha Khan, who are going to present a toolkit on conflict-sensitive human rights due diligence for tech companies. We are super excited to have this conversation because we think it could kind of further the main findings of the toolkit and see, what are maybe some gaps that are missing that us practitioners steeped in digital peace building and also just, inform members of the public can contribute in hopes of really implementing this toolkit within, well-intentioned staff at tech companies across the world. So I don't want to beat around the bush. I'm going to turn it over to the experts. Jennifer and Ayesha, over to you. But I am going to share my screen with your slide deck now. Can you all see it? Do you see it? Yeah. Okay. Great. Jennifer, Ayesha, can you see it?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, good afternoon and good morning. I think everybody in the US would be morning. Good evening if any of you are joining from APAC. I'm Jennifer Easterday from Justpeace Labs. I have had the pleasure of working with and interviewing and connecting with many of you before, so it's great to see familiar and friendly faces. I think that's the intent behind this community of practice, is that people with similar theories of change and activities and interests can continue to come together and build conversations that can last years. That's about how long, that's 5 years or so we've been sort of building up slowly to this toolkit. So Justpeace Labs is an NGO working to help companies to really help facilitate and foster responsible technology in conflict-affected settings. So we were working with tech companies for, on an advocacy perspective for a long time. And I remember going to RightsCon in Toronto, I think it was 2018, and sort of asking, different human rights professionals from some of the major tech companies are sort of, okay, do you think about conflict sensitivity? What are you thinking about when you're releasing your products or services in conflict affected countries? And I got a lot of blank stares. I mean, no judging, just really like, we do UNGPs, and we sort of like human rights framing. What do you mean by conflict sensitivity? So that was a starting point for really trying to build out some guidance specifically for that audience. So just also right off the bat, the main audience for this toolkit are our human rights colleagues working inside tech companies. What do we mean by tech? We took a very broad definition of tech. So it's not just geared towards social media. We're also looking at other kinds of technology companies. with the sort of recognition that these days almost all companies use tech on a massive scale in some way or another. And we're hoping that this can be also taken and applied for smaller companies and startup companies working also and growing within some smaller emerging markets or in conflict affected settings. So that's our target audience right now. We built the toolkit after doing extensive interviews with a number of colleagues and staff in some of the bigger tech companies to get a sense of where their gaps and challenges are, because we really wanted to make this as practical as possible. So if you can skip to the next slide, please. This is really obvious, I think, to everyone in this room. We need enhanced human rights due diligence in conflict affected settings because, as we all know, the scope and scale of human rights risks in conflict settings is significantly larger and more pressing, faster acting. So we really need to build out systems and processes within tech companies to be able to get them ready to move more with more agility when it comes to escalating situations. Also to acknowledge, Lisa's on the call. We had done some research with her and the Total Peace Institute before. Also just to acknowledge that human rights due diligence is not the only way to approach this issue and to approach these sets of problems. There are other important frameworks out there that we can use and we can draw on, but we opted to use a human rights due diligence and UNGPs framing for this work specifically because we thought that that was the best entry point into that target audience and working within the same framework and system and processes that the companies have already decided or to adopt. So next slide, please. So we want to take about 15 minutes to just walk you through super quick, high level, this process, 9 steps. We have the longer report available for anyone who would wish to read it. We go into quite a lot of depth, access and reference a number of other expert reports and other toolkits and guidelines that are out there. So I think we can go to the next slide. This is really easy, really obvious. In fitting with the UNGPs, what we advise companies to do is make it a formal policy and process. It can be an internal policy if that's more suitable. But when you make this formal inside a company, it gives it gravitas, it gives you something to plan around, it gives you a defensible approach that can help really guide the company. And because, as you'll see, the steps can get quite complex, having that policy position in place can help you also advocate internally and move the right kinds of things inside the company to enable action and mitigations. Next slide. What we are also advising tech companies to do, right? So when we talk to our human rights colleagues inside the tech companies, these can often sit either within a legal function, might sit within trust and safety, might sit within public or government affairs. But as we all know, this is a topic and complexity that spans throughout the entire company. So we're also advising these teams to look at different functions across the company, work with your developers, work with your security analysts, work with your PA, work with your communications and marketing and sales team, right? To really think through the potential consequences of their activities and think about how they can also support the enhanced human rights due diligence. Next slide. So the first thing, and I think this can be quite confusing for a lot of practitioners and companies, which is when does this apply? Okay, we'll look at IHL. If it's a non-state or international or non-state, international or non-international armed conflict, excuse me, we'll apply enhanced human rights due diligence, right? IHL definitions sort of trump. We advise taking a more holistic and a more complex view of that because the idea is we want to also look at things like fragility, look at certain red flags that are coming up, because as we in this room know, once a situation has been declared an armed conflict or defined as such under IHL, we've sort of lost the opportunity to take preventative action, and a lot of conflicts prevention activities and a lot of ways that technology can be influencing these conflicts can happen much before it would arrive at that level of being, encompassed under IHL. So we provide extensive guidance on different tools, different metrics, different indicators for how tech companies can take and build a tool and can do some evaluation about what would trigger enhanced human rights due diligence in that case. And we don't give a specific formula. We do provide some tools and examples of how they might measure that. But each company is going to need to do that on its own terms and with its own business model and operations in mind. But this is the basic steps. So you establish those criteria, use existing tools and metrics, indices that are well established. And then you have to also risk tier. And so we give specific guidance around, please don't limit this analysis to where you have customers, right? And to expand the definition of who might be encompassed and what kinds of situations might then require an enhanced human rights due diligence process or mitigation. So that might mean countries where free services are accessed by community members. That should still be in scope, right? We've had some companies say, well, we're not doing additional measures in country X because we don't market our services there. So in this guidance, we're saying we really need to take a broader lens and how we're looking at what should be in scope. And then once you have everything that you know is in scope, of course, recognizing that we can't do everything all of the time and trying to help companies understand how to risk tier and how to move certain things to the top, how to monitor escalating situations and how frequently they should be really keeping up on these tasks. So we can go to the next slide. Sorry, next slide. There we go. This is where I'm really speaking to the expert in the room, and I would love to have some additional questions and feedback from your side to how we can deepen this analysis and continuing advocacy. So we're also asking companies to involve a conflict sensitivity assessment or conflict assessment in this process as separate from, linked to, but separate from any kind of human rights impact assessment. That is obviously because these are the things that are going to influence their decisions, help them understand what kind of leverage they have, kind of actions they can take, and also really help them understand, okay, if we protect this particular vulnerable group by this action, once we have our mapping done, we can see that that is going to have potentially a longer term negative consequence on the conflict down the road. And it can really bring to light a lot of these questions. And then I think 4.2 here, understand the interaction between activities and context. That's really the meat of the issue as far as I'm concerned. That's where we're asking companies to take a look at all the products and services, their employees in the country, their relationships with certain businesses, who owns those businesses, relationship with certain governments, and really see how those behaviors can link to the conflict for better and for worse, and then use that to make an additional assessment. Next slide, number 5. I think this is where Ayesha's going to take over. I just want to conclude that last sort of conflict sensitivity, conflict assessment, we acknowledge that one of the gaps in this is we say take steps to minimize adverse conflict impacts and maximize positive impacts. And we really did not go into sufficient detail on that last one, that maximizing positive impacts. And I think that's where we can really learn from this community and practice in terms of how we can take this prevention, this harm prevention lens, and build that into a peace building in a positive impact way. So I will let Ayesha walk through the next several steps and then welcome your questions at the end.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, so what Jen has done is nicely set up and provided you a broad overview of what this process would look like. What I'm going to do is go a little deeper into the woods and with apologies to my vegetarian and vegan friends, show you how the sausage is really made. So talk about human rights due diligence as it applies in conflict settings. So a lot of this might be, it's a lot of definitions that already have been defined by the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights. It's something that companies have continued to use over the last few years, and they're using even more. So I'm going to go into each of these steps. There's 5 remaining steps that I'm going to talk about. 2 of these, the last and the second last, are cross-cutting. So they apply across all of these 9 steps. So the first one, this is what sort of constitutes a human rights due diligence process, standard typical human rights due diligence process. And in that, you'll see in parts, we've added examples or situations where you can integrate a conflict sensitive lens. However, we recognize that there are still gaps, and what we are hoping after this presentation ends and when we open the room for discussion is that you can tell us what those gaps are, what's missing. So without further ado, let's start here. So the first step is of a human rights impact assessment, human rights due diligence, if you want to look at it more broadly, is analyzing actual and potential impacts. There's a whole methodology to do this, but to just give you a very short sort of overview is you identify who the vulnerable groups are. And there's guidance provided by the UN on that. These groups can be groups that have suffered formal discrimination, societal discrimination, practical discrimination, or hidden discrimination. A formal discrimination example is, there's laws and policies that actually discriminate against them. And you would all know a lot about that already, so I don't necessarily need to go into all of those details. Then the second thing is identify conflict and human rights impacts. Now, under the UNGPs, there is a distinction that is made between impacts that or actions that impact or further advance the conflict, they exacerbate the conflict, impacts that further violate human rights, and impacts that do both. So obviously the most severe ones are those that do both, and then and we'll come into severity a little later, but that's just how these impacts are sort of categorized. And even within that, these impacts are seen to be immediate. So say, for instance, someone posts something on social media, the government, the local policeman comes and catches them, puts them in jail. That's an immediate impact. A future impact is something like, say, for instance, the government has access to certain technological tools which give them access to a lot, which allow them to do a deep level of surveillance. So get access to really intimate personal data and then use that against vulnerable groups for whatever reason. An example of a cumulative impact is something that is, that sort of is a mixture of both immediate and future, and it has a longer timeline, and it's also larger in scale. So say, for instance, an example of that could be that because of an internet shutdown, there's a loss of economic opportunities, there's loss of income, and all the consequent, the domino effect that would have. So that's the part around identifying impacts. Then the next step is assessing salience. Now, what is salience? Salience has a very specific meaning under the UNGPs. It is seen to be a combination of severity and likelihood. And now I'm going now pretty deep into this. Severity is defined as a combination of scope, scale, and remediability. What is scope, scale, and remediability? Scope is basically how many people are impacted. Scale is the intensity. How bad are the impacts? Are people being killed? Are people being sent to prison? Are people's accounts being deactivated? Are, say, for instance, someone's YouTube channel being taken down? Or and then scope, scale, remediability is, as is obvious. What is the can this person be? Can this issue be remedied? Can this person be brought back to the same situation that they were in before this impact happened? And usually in conflict, we see that is hugely difficult, unless it's something like, an internet access being shut down. But even then, there are certain effects that cannot be remedied. And then we also take into account likelihood. So what is the likelihood of all of this happening? The caveat is that severity trumps likelihood. So even if a company identifies, okay, there's very low likelihood of, there's very high likelihood of this happening, but the severity is likely low. So say, for instance, someone's, let's look at the YouTube, let's look at the example of someone being sent to prison for something they posted, political commentator being sent to prison for something that they posted on their YouTube account. The severity is really high, but the likelihood is low. The UNGPs say that severity trumps likelihood. So if the impact is going to be really severe, and this is like being sent to prison is a violation of one's right to personal liberty and security, or being sent to prison for no reason, I would rather say. Then they would have to prioritize it higher, and we'll come to prioritization right after this. One thing I forgot to mention was when these impacts are being assessed, they're being assessed against all the rights contained in the International Bill of Human Rights. And that includes of course, your Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It includes your ICCPR, ICESCR. It includes, the ILO conventions. So it's a pretty broad universe of rights. And then there's a lot of commentary on how these are interpreted in different scenarios as well. There's quite a lot that companies have to work with. So we've done looking at salience. Then you conduct a proportionate risk tiering of impacts. Now, what does that mean? So there's basically methodologies that companies can usually develop, which are based on how severe this is and the likelihood. So depending on the severity and likelihood examples that we give, you can say, okay, this particular risk around people being sent to jail is a tier 1 risk for us versus someone's accounts being deactivated or someone's tweet being taken down or something like that. So that depends on the product, of course. It'll vary depending on the kind of technology. And it depends on the local country context. It depends on the kind of risks that can, and I know this is a lot, it's a lot of jargon and it's a lot of detail, but there's actually a lot of guidance provided on this by the UNGPs, and there's frameworks that have been built out of this by various civil society organizations. Then the next part of this is examining attribution. Attribution means how is the company connected to this harm? Or how would the company be connected to this harm? And so there as well, you have an entire framework known as cause, contribute, and linked. The guidance under the UNGPs is that if a company has caused, by caused means it's directly, an action that the company is directly taking is actually directly leading to a human rights harm. So say, for instance, social media companies censoring legitimate speech to make sure, just to prevent fallouts with the government, they're directly contributing to a harm, which is a violation of freedom of speech and expression. Contribution means that the company isn't directly contributing to it, but isn't directly causing it, but it is creating conditions and circumstances that can contribute to the harm. So for instance, an app store that has unwittingly or unknowingly hosted an app that gamifies the humiliation of a vulnerable ethnic group or minority group or whatever. So they may not be necessarily causing that, but they are, by allowing that app, they're not the ones who've developed that app, but by allowing it to stay on their app store, they're contributing to the harm. Directly linked, it can be a number of things. For instance, a company's technology is being used as a component of a new product, say for instance a weapon or something like that, and the company doesn't realize it, but it is directly linked. So the UNGPs say that the company should try to provide remedy in these circumstances, especially during cause and contribute. So that's the bit around salience, and as you can see, it goes really, really deep. And then the last thing is examining leverage, assessing leverage. Now, leverage means what can the company do to prevent that harm from taking place? Are there any mitigation measures? Can they speak to the government? Do they have that sort of a relationship? But if they speak to the government, would they be causing further harm? So can they speak to civil society organizations who have certain leverage with the government? Can they speak, do you use third parties, for example, company associations, business associations, to do that sort of negotiating? So it really depends. But the entire idea of assessing leverage is to see, how can I mitigate this harm? What can I do to prevent it? So that's the part around analyzing actual and potential impacts. And this is really just the tip of the iceberg. And this can get really detailed, and it can be a really intense exercise. But these are the main steps for you. And you can read the report for more. But if you go to the next slide, please, Nick. Then there comes the part around assessing impacts. So, I already gave you a little bit of example of what that would look like. But with addressing impacts, you're looking at, making sure that these impacts have a conflict sensitive lens. So say, for instance, if a company, again, I'm going to give you an example of a social media company because that seems to be the easiest. They adjust their content moderation policies they completely take down violent, extremist and terrorist content. That's fine. That's one way of mitigating the impact. But as a result, what they've done is that it also impacts evidence that could be collected and used for future transitional justice or just accountability purposes. Sometimes in some cases, we've seen companies even take down content that has been uploaded by journalists and reporters, which is oftentimes now covered under the newsworthy or news exception. But we've seen that hamper evidence collection processes as well. So that's something that that's the conflict sensitivity part. That's why you should the mitigation should take into account all of these things and incorporate a conflict sensitive lens. Then the second part of the addressing impact is that ensuring that the mitigations are proportionate to the risk of the harm. So say, for instance, an example of this could be that you take down speech. There's a there's a violation of human rights, of course, the right to freedom of expression, but you sort of have to balance it against the larger harm that could happen if that speech was allowed to remain. It could foment ethnic violence, it could it could cause riots, it could cause whatever. So you have to sort of do a balancing act, and that balancing act becomes more important, that proportionate tiering or whatever of risk, it becomes more important when there's a conflict situation. So that's what we mean by integrating a conflict sensitive approach. Then we also need a plan and strategy for when you need to roll back certain mitigations. And this is because conflict is cyclical, right? It comes and goes, it ebbs and flows, and certain actions that you've taken now, they may not be effective, say, in the next couple of months, and vice versa. So this is something that companies usually have to do. Then build mitigations into existing and planned cross-organizational outputs. Now, what this means is that the company has to take a cross-company approach. It can't just be the human rights teams, which are usually quite small. It can't just be your sustainability teams. They need to basically get all they need to get all the teams involved. So, for instance, they can work with trust and safety to identify what are the dangerous patterns and narratives that they're saying. They need to talk with their research and policy teams to see how they can educate citizens about how they can promote media literacy, how they can promote online literacy amongst the general population. So that's just an example of how they can build mitigation. It's not just a small 2 people, 3 people team doing this. In certain situations, when nothing seems to be working, the company may need to consider a responsible exit. And by responsible exit, also they can't just pack their bags and go. What we recommend is that they look at the pros and cons of staying versus leaving. How who will it impact? How will it impact them? And then take a balanced approach. And this is easier said than done. And that's why the step around stakeholder engagement, which we'll talk about, is so important, because you talk to your local stakeholders and they tell you what would be difficult, what would be easy. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail, but this is an option that has been offered by the UN guiding principles, and sometimes companies have taken that in different scenarios. but it's a difficult act. It's a complex and difficult act. And then, of course, providing operational level grievance mechanisms. In certain cases, this is easier for a company to do. So, companies already provide certain levels of grievance mechanisms. For instance, if you say, oh, my post was taken down, there's automated systems that you can already report to, and they'll do a quick review and they'll be like, oh, it was taken down for this reason, oh, or we're sorry, we removed it, but here's a potential, like we've reinstated it. But when dealing with like large scale or gross human rights abuses, those won't work. So in certain cases, in those cases, the company needs to see, are we better off? I mean, of course, we can do that at a basic level. We can continue providing this sort of low level support, but is it better for us to support these processes if these are taking place, say, by a third party, by a transitional justice mechanism or something that's been created? It might make more sense for the company to support those processes rather than trying to, quell the fires completely by themselves. And so we talk a little bit about how they can do that. And there's actually, there is something known as, the UN has something known as the BTEC project. And some of you might already be familiar with that. And they provide a lot of really good guidance on how companies can actually make this a reality. Moving to the next slide, please. Communicating progress. We've seen many times companies, particularly working in high risk or conflict zones, they'll publish updates on their websites to say, oh, this is what we are doing. This is how we are preventing the conflict from getting, this is what we are doing as a tech company. And, this is what we think is best. And sometimes those can be very positively taken, but companies need to be very careful around making sure that whenever they're publishing anything of that sort, any status updates on how they're trying to help people on the ground, it shouldn't further influence the conflict. It should not put their employees, contractors, or business partners at risk. It should not put external stakeholders, who are often the most vulnerable groups, like the external stakeholders who they've consulted with, civil society organizations mostly. It shouldn't put them at risk. It should avoid communicating any technological solutions that can be used by bad actors. And we're seeing as technology evolves, conflicts are often being fought online. Conflicts are often being fought in the virtual world in very nefarious and very dangerous ways, and which can impact like a large scale of people in a very short span of time. So when they're communicating progress, companies may choose not to share anything, but if they do, then they have to keep a lot of things in mind. Then the last two issues, the next slide, if you can please go to that, Nick. The last two issues are cross-cutting issues, as I mentioned. The first among these is stakeholder engagement. Now, this is something that I'm sure all of you know very well. You are consulted, I'm sure, by several leading companies to advise them on what to do in difficult situations. So I'm not necessarily going to go a lot into that, but we've provided some very high-level guidance or best practices on what stakeholder engagement should entail. So some of these include formulate a strategy, create processes that are specific to that particular context. Don't try to do a one size, like what works in Ethiopia will not work in Myanmar, or things like that. Make sure that it's context specific. Plan ahead, garner resources, take a cross-functional approach. Again, these are not things that a small human rights team can do. Get all of your different team members and different organizational units involved. Make sure that the engagement is sustained. So don't just approach them at the last minute and say, hey, give us all your time. Try to build relationships with them. And that's easier to do when things are not at a very crazy, like the conflict is not at a very intense stage, when things are still relatively peaceful. So start at that point. But if you don't have a choice, if the only time that you can engage with stakeholders is when the conflict is rife, then understand that they may not necessarily be able to give you, all the time, and be very, very careful about their safety and their security, because they're often the most vulnerable in this situation. We also talk about ensuring diversity, because depending on who you speak to, depending on which side of what their politics is, or who they align themselves with, their opinions will vary. engage with a diversity of groups, not just civil society, engage with business groups, engage with, I mean, where possible, governments. Often that is not easy. Understand that there might be many stakeholders who cannot speak to you. They have barriers to access, and try to work around those, but be very respectful and mindful. Address potential bias. We already spoke about that. Plan for security concerns. Use third parties. Oftentimes, we see companies can use, they have the option to use third parties. For instance, different sort of, multi-stakeholder groups who can help them with identifying and engaging with the right kind of stakeholders, and then consider different ways to engage. If it's your online, be careful about the security of their online connection, and there's different ways to do that. So this is pretty straightforward. Next slide, please. Yes, now this is the last one, and this is around leveraging industry-led and multi-stakeholder collaborations. Now, oftentimes companies do not have resources on their own to, do a conflict assessment, to do a complete, stakeholder engagement. So we recommend that instead of trying to do everything on your own, and to be more effective, try to partner with other companies in your sector, or try to partner with business associations in your sector. That will help with leverage as well. If there's a number of companies that are sort of taking action on a particular thing, and who are negotiating, or who are asking for or requesting the government to not ask them to do something, that would be more effective rather than just one company trying to do it on their own. There's strength in numbers. So this is basically around that. So we talk about how they can, join forces with other companies to do conflict mapping, ecosystem mapping, sometimes to do risk assessments, to exercise leverage, as I just mentioned, advocate for regulatory reforms, and also do in-country stakeholder engagement. So with that, I can wrap up now. And Jen, unless you have anything to add, I believe that now we are going to open, we have 20 minutes. We'll open the room for discussion to get feedback from you, particularly on certain gaps that you see, any things that you think are good, anything that you think can change a little bit, because we are also developing this, and we are building this as we go along. And we can identify different ways in which we can involve the peace building community more in this process. Yeah. So yeah, that's all from me.
Thanks, Ayesha. I just have one or two things to add, and I think it's something that we, in 15 minutes, can't get into all the depth, and in a 15-slide presentation, but just as a reminder that we're asking companies to assess not only human rights impacts, but also impacts on the conflict. That's where your expertise would come in. We're aware that most companies do not do this in-house. They look for outside expertise. And so we're also hoping to use this as an opportunity to further this as a community of practice, and also explore ways that as peace builders who understand technology and how some of these things connect out to communities on the ground, that we can really come together in our advocacy and in our work in providing expertise or consulting services to companies, where we can sort of start to speak with the same voice and recognize the same sets of issues. And then secondly, on that stakeholder engagement, I think that list appears to be sort of standard practice, but what we try to do in the toolkit is provide more color and context on how not to engage with civil society groups in conflict settings. Like, people are busy, they have higher stakes issues that they're trying to address. Now is not the time to come and start an engagement on, for example, internet penetration and use patterns amongst certain communities, right? We're really trying to make sure that our corporate human rights colleagues are aware of some of the pressing concerns and considerations that our colleagues working on the ground are experiencing, especially at a moment when a conflict is escalating, and really trying to bring that home. Hence the start early, get these relationships, trusted relationships established when there's not a conflict escalating, right? And so we can build some of that rapport. So that's my only added context from Ayesha's excellent presentation of the more complicated part of the presentation. Thank you for that. And we're happy to hear any questions you have. I think there's some already in the
both of you. Yeah, I saw some great comments in the chat. Lena, I know you dropped a few good comments in the chat. I want to hand it over to you. And just kind of in terms of how this will be run, do feel free to raise your hand and I can call on you, but I'll facilitate. So Lena, I want to give you the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Ayesha and Jennifer. This is a big lift that you've done, and it offers guidance. The question is, are the incentives there to take forward that guidance? So I want to just share a couple comments and then ask a question. So we've actually worked, at Search for Common Ground with the extractive sectors and with the voluntary principles. And it's quite clear that, unless the company actually has incentives to decrease insecurity around its operations or reputational damage, that it's not going to make the necessary investment to do this. And then all the risks that you pointed out around the way that they work with or don't work well with civil society actors plays out in that sector. Now, if we look at secondly, like how have we tried to engage with the tech companies, we found that exactly the tech companies are often asking Search for Common Ground, please help us to understand the conflict dynamics in XY country, right? And, maybe sometimes there's funds involved and other times there's not. And, there's a lot of this aspect of, asking civil society to do the moderation work as volunteers rather than seeing that that's the investment. And, listening to your presentation, it's an entire architecture, right? That needs to be put in place cross-departmentally, exactly. So for me, I feel like, and I put in the chat, the thing around the code of conduct, some other person put in around the Santa Clara principle, like if we're not actually creating the right incentives, and then of course celebrating the companies that do begin to do this well, I think that this beautiful toolkit will remain on the margins. So I have really no criticism of the content of what you've put there, but like when you're trying to make change and hold a whole sector accountable, it's often not that they don't know how to do it. That's the problem. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
No, thank you, Lena. Those are really important comments. And I think in one way, this toolkit demonstrates that there have been some inroads and some success in that incentivizing. So I guess we should say at the outset that Google and Meta paid for this, frankly. So there is some inroads there. So from that moment at RightsCon Toronto in 2018, where we were getting blank stares, unfortunately, world events, the Ukraine crisis at the end of last year with everything happening in Afghanistan, and just I think that more and more as we talk about this, the tech companies are waking up to, oh my God, this is really hard and we really need to understand. In terms of incentives, I unfortunately am a lawyer, so I always tend to go to the punitive sort of, we need to work with regulators or the UN or whomever, like get this into that BTEC UN system, build on the work that they have done to make this standard principles part of the UNGP architecture, if not part of like mandatory human rights diligence regulation that's coming down the pipe in Europe and elsewhere, right? So I tend to use that framing. I know that probably a lot of you in the room have much more creative and positive looking ways to incentivize action. I'd love to hear ideas and thoughts on that, because absolutely, we need to build out this advocacy community to keep the work and momentum going.
Thank you so much, Jen. Thank you so much, Lena. Any additional questions? I don't want to put our Sarah Kenny, I don't want to put you on the spot, but Lena did say she was interested from the perspective of GIFCT, what you can see as working within tech companies to be able to take down harmful content.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to share some links. I was just pulling some links to respond. And I think this ties in nicely to your comments, Jen, that we're a bit more on the upstream side here. So GIFCT is a multi-stakeholder organization, doesn't host any PII. We don't actually have any ownership over company takedowns or deplatforming of content. But the ways that we can contribute to this problem set are at the outset of what it looks like to become a GIFCT member. So we have a rigorous set of membership criteria that have been informed by a human rights impact assessment undertaken by BSR. In the early days of our existence as a 501c3. And we are actually just now adding an additional layer of human rights review to potential tech companies before we allow them to gain access to our shared technological tooling. When it comes to our shared technological tooling, we have a code of conduct. We are baking in additional layers of transparency and using the power of multi-stakeholder engagement to constantly evolve on how cross-sector approaches to taking down terrorist and violent extremist content can be supported by the perspectives of civil society. Just a few other ways that we're tackling this issue. Transparency reporting. So that's one of the big things that we really emphasize with tech companies. We offer resources on how companies across the tech stack approach this issue. We offer mentorship on how to, bake this into cross-team tech company operations for this issue set, and then human rights as well. Like, what does it mean for a human rights perspective to be baked into a tech company's whole ethos? And I think there's a lot to be developed in this space still. There are not a lot of really crisp and clear paradigms and architectures, to use your point, Lena. So that is something that we're developing. So I'll drop some links in the chat about some of these resources. We've also just published a human rights policy, and I can say I really appreciate the really detailed approach to a human rights due diligence framework, which in our third year as an NGO, we're working on developing right now to accompany our human rights policy. And so anybody who's interested in contributing to GIFCT's evolution in the human rights space and supporting tech companies here, I'll put my email in the chat and would love to collaborate. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Anyone else have any other questions? Or, Raju, go ahead.
Thanks, Nick. I just have a general question. Ayesha, thank you for that presentation. How would, like say 10 NGOs in India, if they wanted to look at the risk assessment of doing business in Kashmir, how could you use this toolbox?
So this toolbox is primarily for companies, in the sense that the companies would be the ones who would approach the NGOs, depending on their expertise and depending on the situation, and they would engage with them. So the NGOs or civil society organizations come in at the stakeholder engagement phase. So that's how it's structured, and that's how the UNGPs also prescribe companies do it.
I see. And then how is the cost shared for doing?
I mean, like usually stakeholder engagements are not, I mean, I'm not aware of, how it works for all companies, but these are usually not paid. These are voluntary, as Lena also mentioned, these are usually done on a voluntary basis. So not necessarily paid.
All right, thank you very much.
I should just add to that. I think, and that's something that we've tried to raise as a sort of small point without going into too much detail, but that question of equality and sustained relationship building, and part of the reason why we're trying to advocate for more collective industry-wide cooperation on these issues is to get to this. It's a drain. I mean, we all know, we've all worked for small organizations or even large organizations that are resource constrained, and you don't get paid when 5 companies come and they each ask for an hour or 2 hours of your time in the middle of an escalating conflict, right? So we need to also think about ways that we can help make that more equitable. Also with the consideration that not all organizations are in a position where they want to or can accept money or any kind of financial benefit or even a donation from companies, especially in times of conflict where that might put them at risk or give perception of bias that they would like to avoid. So I think these are definitely open questions when we're working in situations where, working with civil society can cause higher risks, both for the individuals and the organizations, as well as making sure that these kinds of engagements are equitable.
Thank you both. Lena, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I wanted to say two things. I mean, Raju, I think your question is fascinating because if, for example, a group of organizations in Kashmir said, we'd like to work with you to have this specific scope looked at, and actually here's a toolkit that could help to guide you to do this, right? That could be the opening of a conversation, which could end up leading to the appropriate resources being put on the table for joint exercise, to at least do a snapshot of what does it mean and what are the risks. And in some of those risks, you may find that civil society organizations in Kashmir are able to do some of the digital literacy and cybersecurity work, and then some of the platforms are able to better understand the risks and ways that they could do more. So I just wanted to sort of pivot it back to you to say that I know you join us a lot, Raju, and I think that it could really be something. And again, Sarah, I've been so impressed with how JIFCT has been able to actually make behavior change, if I can call it that, within the companies, right? And so, again, like, is there something more that that peace builder organizations could be doing to learn from how to get that behavior change through? I referred in my last question to this code of conduct in New Zealand. I was in Sri Lanka. They're trying to replicate something like that, which would basically say, like, there is an ongoing space, because we know these are crisis contexts. They are fragile. They will not be stable for quite a long time. So let's be ready for those crises. Let's do ongoing review of what is that hateful and harmful speech, and I feel like that's a little bit what JIFCT is trying to do. And once again, Jennifer and Ayesha, it's like your guidance is like the reminder that it's not like we don't know how to do this,
Exactly. And I think those civil society groups could use this as a starting point. By no means the extent to which we want to see this analysis, but you say, look, there's this guidelines. At a bare minimum, you all need to be asking these questions. We also suggest that you ask these additional questions because we're peace builders and we've been working in the region, and use this as a template for minimal action. And I think when we do get calls from companies asking, oh, can you tell me about human rights risks for social media in this particular context? Say, well, you guys, have you done your conflict stakeholder mapping? Are you aware of these particular contexts? And if we, look at this vulnerable group, how, bring some of this into that conversation and engagement. And I think in the longer toolkit, Raju, you also see some tools that we hope can also prompt some thinking to break down some of the silos, because we've also found, and one of the other more interesting for me questions is when you're talking to peace builders and looking at conflict assessments, and then you're looking at human rights colleagues who look at human rights impact assessments, you have to balance that out. And that is not an easy conversation to have. And it's one when we get siloed into our professional field, we can sometimes forget what some of those other perspectives might be. And this toolkit is also trying to prompt thinking amongst our communities of, okay, so I can't go full blown on this particular human rights protection because later down the line, that might have an impact on the conflict. I might have to curtail what we might want to do to protect a particular right, like freedom of expression, when that might have an impact on the conflict, or vice versa, and really be able to surface those tensions and have a framework and a language where we can talk about them in a way that impacts change and impacts action in a corporate environment.
Thank you both. We're getting close to the hour, but I want to give both Lily and Will a chance to ask their questions. So Lily, and then Will, over to you.
Sure, and maybe this is more a solicitation for help than a question, but I think it gets to like the target audience for some of these advocacy initiatives, but also, calls for behavior change in companies. So I'm just wondering, and forgive me, I haven't been able to go through the entire toolkit, so but I look forward to doing so. So in environments where we're working with, let's say, smaller tech companies with very limited budgets and limited staff, but who are, developing who are starting to kind of develop or work with AI. I think a tension that is starting to exist is, how do we responsibly build in some type of impact and monitoring system now with these, emerging technologies and with working with very small organizations in resource deprived areas that's cost effective and reasonable, but that still upholds the principles that we care about, right? And I think, we do things like conflict sensitivity analysis, conflict analysis, whatnot, but when they're deploying this tech, I guess we're looking for some help in implementation, like what can we really do with small organizations with limited resources. And so if anybody has any kind of tips or guidance or examples or people that they know that can provide some very technical coaching on that, we'd love to be connected.
Thank you, Lily. Will.
This is, I have a kind of a broad question, so it's perhaps unfair to do it at the last moment. So I'm happy to follow up with the team here, the presenters and anyone else. But I guess my question comes to kind of power dynamics. And I'm thinking in terms of both, it seems like this is just a really comprehensive and methodical approach to this problem. And I commend you for broadening it beyond social media to the broader tech company arena. And I think that's really useful. I guess my question in terms of power dynamics is kind of twofold. One, how one socializes this approach to the companies, within companies. I think one of the things that those of us who have worked in peace tech and worked with companies, we have good relations with the human rights teams within the companies, but obviously there's always a challenge of their role within the company, their role within decision making in terms of business model and so on. So that's one area of power dynamic. And then the other one, I think several other commenters have spoken to, is about local engagement and how when you're talking about multinational companies that don't have a local presence, how people are able to interact. And I'm thinking just recently the news of say the content moderators in Kenya that have backed out of that work. And so I just wonder if you could address that. I wondered maybe if your interviews with the companies or perhaps surveys with them give you some sense of at least the potential for socialization. And again, thank you. I look forward to going through it further.
Yeah, thanks, Will. And with literally no minutes left, I think that's one of the core questions here, and that's a really tough nut to crack. And I think it really underlies the effectiveness of all of our work in this area. One of the hopes we have, I guess, in terms of next steps for anybody who can stay on for another minute, is we want to take this and do some of that socialization. We're hoping that by having this guidance and working with some of those organizations who have more of that standing relationship, we can start to mainstream some of these concepts and some of this language. And then we can also continue to work with colleagues who don't have the same resources and the same access to continue building this out. Now, whether that means we collaborate to provide reports, resources, get this into our conferences, get this language right into our community more, and then also continuing to work with the companies to help them understand what equitable engagement looks like. Those are just really high level thoughts, but would love to engage further on that. It's a critical topic.
Thank you. Thank you for those questions. And we are at the hour, so I want to be respectful of people's time. Before we close, I do just want to do a quick plug. Lisa Shirk, she's one of the co-chairs for leadership of this community practice, has been promoting a Designing Tech for Social Cohesion conference taking place in San Francisco at the end of February. She dropped the registration link in the chat. I encourage you all to check it out. I will be there, my first time in San Francisco. I know, very exciting. But a number of great organizations are involved with co-sponsoring it, including Search for Common Ground, Alliance for Peacebuilding. So please do check it out. But I want to thank Jennifer and Ayesha tremendously. It was a fantastic discussion, fantastic presentation. We know you were really digging through a lot of substantive content, and I enjoy the thoroughness of your presentation, and I hope that the insights from this discussion helped you further understand where this toolkit could go. If it's okay, Jennifer and Ayesha, I think I will share just like your contact information perhaps with follow-up just to attendees of this. So in case you can further connect and on any of the points that were raised. And yeah, we look forward to it. And stay tuned for the February session. We'll be announcing that shortly. And just do want to quickly plug, the PeaceCon request for proposals is out. We released it this week. It's open until February 8th. Deadline may be extended, but we'll see. But please do take a look at that take a look over the proposal requirements and submission process. We really look forward to seeing all of your proposals and seeing you all at PeaceCon in May. Save the date, May 3rd through 5th. Okay, all right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.